The tension permeating the sterile corridors of General Hospital had reached a fever pitch, weaving together the desperate threads of a medical crisis and an impending legal catastrophe. Dr. Portia Robinson stood at the precipice of a defining moment in her life, caught between the biological inevitability of bringing a new child into the world and the devastating reality that her partner, Curtis Ashford, was facing a swift and unyielding ticket to Pentonville. The atmosphere inside the hospital was thick with the scent of antiseptic and the heavy weight of unspoken dread as Portia felt the first unmistakable, sharp contractions of labor tightening across her abdomen. It was a cruel juxtaposition of timing, an agonizing alignment of events that threatened to shatter the fragile sanctuary they had spent months trying to build. Outside the walls of her examination room, the wheels of justice were turning with a terrifying velocity, driven by acting District Attorney Justine Turner, who found herself trapped in an unenviable position of upholding the law while navigating the deeply personal minefields of Port Charles. Curtis, whose recent actions had spiraled drastically out of control following an explosive, unprovoked physical altercation with the esteemed surgeon Dr. Isaiah Gannon, was now staring down a bleak future of felony assault and battery charges. The public fallout from the attack had already sent shockwaves through the corporate infrastructure of Aurora Media, threatening to decimate his professional reputation and send the company's stock into a tailspin, but those macro-level disasters paled in comparison to the immediate, visceral terror of being ripped away from his family at the exact moment his child was entering the world. Portia knew that the legal system would show little mercy to a man who had left a prominent medical professional severely injured, effectively putting other lives at risk by incapacitating a surgeon scheduled for critical operations. Yet, as the physical pain of her labor intensified, a fierce, primal maternal instinct took hold of her, eclipsing her usual dedication to rigid ethical boundaries and replacing it with a desperate willingness to bargain with the devil if it meant keeping Curtis by her side. Justine Turner walked into the hospital's private consultation wing not as a predatory prosecutor seeking another conviction for her record, but as a woman deeply conflicted by the sheer gravity of the human collateral involved in this case. Her close personal ties to Jordan Ashford made the situation an absolute minefield, creating an agonizing conflict of interest that she had to manage under the intense scrutiny of a public demanding accountability for the high-profile assault. When Portia cornered her in the quiet alcove just down the hall from the maternity ward, clutching her stomach as another contraction rippled through her, the professional facade began to crack. Portia did not plead for absolute absolution or ask for the charges to magically vanish into thin air, as she was far too intelligent and pragmatic to believe such a miracle was possible under the current political climate. Instead, she offered a dangerous, high-stakes proposition, a desperate trait of leverage and professional vulnerability that only a mother facing the loss of her family's anchor could possibly conceive. The air between the two women grew exceptionally still as Portia leaned against the cold drywall, her breathing measured and shallow as she fought through the pain, locking eyes with the acting district attorney to deliver an ultimatum wrapped in a plea for mercy. Portia possessed deep, intimate knowledge of the hospital's internal mechanisms, including the highly volatile and controversial investigation surrounding recent laboratory anomalies and the systemic vulnerabilities within the facility's administrative structure that the DA's office had been desperately trying to unravel for months. She offered to provide full, uncompromised cooperation and access to internal medical registries that could blow open a separate, massive corporate fraud case involving high-ranking city officials, under the strict condition that Justine officially delay the arraignment and suspend the active arrest warrant for Curtis until the birth was completed and the baby was safely delivered. It was a calculated gamble that pushed the absolute limits of legal ethics, forcing Justine to weigh the immediate capture of an assault suspect against a treasure trove of systemic evidence that could clean up Port Charles on a much larger scale. As the heavy minutes ticked away, the reality of Portia's physical condition became impossible to ignore, her labor progressing with an alarming speed that signaled this child would not wait for legal counsel to review the terms of a backroom arrangement. Justine stood in the dim light of the hospital corridor, listening to the rhythmic, distant bleeping of fetal monitors, acutely aware that a single misstep on her part could result in a catastrophic media leak or an accusation of prosecutorial misconduct. Yet, looking at Portia's raw vulnerability and recognizing the profound tragedy of a child being born while its father was dragged away in handcuffs just down the hall, the prosecutor made a quiet, definitive choice to accept the terms. The deal was struck not with the flourish of pens on legal documents, but with a tense, solemn nod of mutual understanding in a quiet corner of a bustling hospital, setting into motion a complex, temporary shield around Curtis that would buy them just enough hours to face the miracle of birth before the hammer of the law inevitably came crashing down. The shadow of the impending legal hammer loomed larger as the reality of the secret pact settled over the hospital room, transforming the delivery suite into an ad hoc tactical bunker where the rule of law was temporarily suspended by a handshake. Curtis Ashford stood by the window, his large frame silhouetted against the dimming Port Charles skyline, feeling the crushing weight of a freedom that currently existed entirely on borrowed time. Every deep breath he took inside that room felt like a luxury stolen from the state of New York, a stay of execution granted not by a merciful judge, but by the desperate brilliance of the woman currently breathing through another agonizing contraction on the medical bed behind him. He looked at Portia, her forehead beaded with sweat, her fingers gripping the metal rails of the bed with a fierce intensity that mirrored the psychological grip she was maintaining over their chaotic reality. Curtis knew the depth of the sacrifice she was making. By promising Justine Turner access to the internal administrative databases and revealing the institutional rot hidden within General Hospital's medical registries, Portia was risking her own standing in the medical community and potentially inviting a devastating board review. Yet, as he moved to her side and took her hand, the fierce warmth of her grip reminded him that they were past the point of conventional morality, deeply entrenched in a survival scenario where the arrival of their child was the only milestone that truly mattered. Justine Turner, meanwhile, had retreated to a secluded office near the administrative wing, her mind racing as she meticulously structured the bureaucratic illusion necessary to keep the Port Charles Police Department at bay. She was acutely aware that delaying an active arrest warrant for a high-profile assault suspect like the CEO of Aurora Media was a professional gamble that could easily end her career if discovered prematurely by the press or rival factions within the city's government. The public outcry over Dr. Isaiah Gannon's incapacitation was growing louder by the hour, with medical advocacy groups and the hospital's own legal counsel demanding immediate retributive action against the man who had derailed a vital surgical schedule and put innocent patients in jeopardy. Justine had to manipulate the paperwork with surgical precision, utilizing a series of calculated procedural delays, claiming a sudden administrative backlog and a necessity for further evidentiary review regarding the precise timeline of the altercation before the formal arraignment could be executed. It was a high-stakes shell game played on the digital screens of the district attorney's network, and with every minute that passed without an officer arriving to place Curtis in handcuffs, Justine felt the metaphorical ice beneath her feet growing dangerously thin. Inside the delivery room, the atmosphere was a volatile mix of medical urgency and hushed, conspiratorial conversations as the labor progressed with a relentless momentum that brooked no delay. Portia looked up at Curtis, her eyes wide with a combination of physical exhaustion and sharp, lucid focus, using the quiet moments between her escalating contractions to remind him of the absolute necessity of discretion. She made it unequivocally clear that once this child was born, the protective shield offered by Justine would vanish instantly, and he would have to surrender himself to the authorities without a single shred of resistance or public spectacle. Curtis nodded solemnly, his voice a low, gravelly whisper as he swore to uphold his end of the bargain, understanding that any attempt to evade the eventual fallout would completely undo the immense risk Portia and Justine had taken on his behalf. The irony was not lost on him that his path to redemption had to begin in a jail cell, but looking down at Portia's swelling abdomen and hearing the steady, reassuring thrum of the fetal heart monitor, he knew that ensuring his presence for the birth of his child was a prize worth whatever legal hell awaited him on the other side of the dawn. The physical manifestation of Portia's labor began to shift from predictable, manageable waves into an unforgiving, continuous cascade of agony, pushing the boundaries of her clinical composure and forcing her to retreat entirely into the raw instinct of survival. Inside the dim, private examination room, the sterile world of General Hospital seemed to shrink until the only relevant metrics were the sharp, upward spikes on the fetal monitor and the agonizingly slow sweep of the second hand on the wall clock. Curtis remained anchored to her side, his large hands anchoring her trembling frame as he whispered fierce words of encouragement, masking the profound terror that was clawing at his own chest. He knew that outside that door, the temporary immunity engineered by Justine Turner was maintaining a fragile, highly volatile perimeter around them, holding off a precinct of police officers who were eager to execute a warrant for his arrest. The sheer hypocrisy of his situation was a bitter pill to swallow, finding himself revered as a supportive partner in one room while being hunted as a volatile felon just 50 feet away down the hallway. Justine Turner paced the length of her makeshift office, her smartphone vibrating almost continuously with urgent inquiries from the chief of police and the public relations liaison for the mayor's office, both demanding to know why the high-profile CEO of Aurora Media had not yet been processed into the system. She deflected each query with practiced, bureaucratic ambiguity, fabricating a narrative about ongoing technical glitches within the digital booking portal and the absolute legal necessity of standardizing the witness depositions before proceeding with a public arrest. Justine knew she was playing a highly dangerous game of political chicken, and if Portia failed to deliver the administrative encryption keys and the specific medical registries documenting the municipal fraud scheme once the labor concluded, she would be left completely exposed to charges of obstruction of justice. The weight of her secret pact with Portia felt heavier with every passing moment, forcing her to confront the grim reality that in Port Charles, the line between enforcing the law and actively subverting it for a greater human cause was often dangerously thin. The medical staff assigned to Portia's delivery remained blissfully unaware of the legal high-wire act occurring just beneath the surface of their routine procedures, focused entirely on the alarming velocity with which her cervical dilation was progressing. The lead obstetrician noted with growing concern that the baby's heart rate was beginning to experience minor decelerations during the peak of each contraction, a subtle signal of fetal distress that added an entirely new layer of urgency to an already suffocating environment. Curtis watched the monitor with a disciplined focus born of his own past traumas, understanding that the universe was demanding an absolute, uncompromising payment of emotional stamina from him if he ever hoped to see his family intact on the other side of this crisis. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against Portia's damp hairline, silently begging the universe to grant them just a few more hours of stolen safety before the reality of his violent mistake with Dr. Isaiah Gannon returned to claim its heavy pound of flesh. As the afternoon light began to bleed into a bruised, purple twilight across the waters of the harbor, the physical environment inside the labor delivery suite reached its ultimate crescendo of noise and movement. The rhythmic, electronic chirping of the medical equipment seemed to sync perfectly with Portia's ragged breathing, creating a chaotic symphony that perfectly encapsulated the intersecting crises of her personal and professional life. Justine Turner stood by the nurse's station just outside the room, her presence acting as a silent, formidable barrier against any premature intrusion from the local authorities, her arms crossed as she mentally rehearsed the exact sequence of events that would have to occur the moment the child took its first breath. The stage was fully set for the final, definitive act of this agonizing drama, where the arrival of a brand new life would serve as the immediate, unyielding signal for the legal system to finally shatter the illusion of peace and exact its severe retribution. General Hospital Spoilers provides deeper context on the legal and professional fallout Curtis Ashford faces following his confrontation with Dr. Isaiah Gannon, including the looming threat of prison time at Pentonville. The definitive climax of this medical and legal siege arrived with the sudden, pierces cries of a newborn breaking through the heavy, suffocating silence of the delivery suite. In that singular, transformative microsecond, the intersecting crises of institutional corruption, impending felony arraignments, and devastating personal betrayals seemed to suspend entirely, replaced by the profound, universal miracle of new life. Portia sank back into her pillows, her physical stamina completely spent, her eyes glistening with a volatile mixture of intense maternal triumph and absolute, unadulterated dread for what she knew must follow immediately after. Curtis leaned over her, weeping openly as he cradled his new child, his heart breaking over the realization that the very hands currently holding this fragile new life would be bound by steel handcuffs before the dawn could fully break over Port Charles. He looked at Portia, silently conveying an eternal gratitude for the desperate, tactical gamble she had executed with the district attorney's office to afford him this brief, irreplaceable window of fatherhood. The heavy wood door of the suite opened with a quiet, deliberate click, and the formidable silhouette of acting District Attorney Justine Turner appeared in the dim threshold, her expression completely devoid of personal malice but entirely resolute in her professional obligation. The temporary, bureaucratic shield she had woven throughout the long hours of the evening had officially reached its hard, non-negotiable expiration date. Justine did not speak a word, understanding that the visual presence of her and the two plainclothes detectives standing discreetly behind her in the shadows spoke with an unyielding, absolute clarity. She had honored her side of the dangerous backroom arrangement to the absolute letter, successfully delaying the execution of the assault warrant through a calculated series of simulated administrative backlogs and prolonged evidentiary reviews while Dr. Isaiah Gannon's medical advocates demanded immediate justice. Now, the state of New York was here to collect its heavy pound of flesh, and the illusion of safety that had protected the delivery room evaporated into the sterile, chilly air of the hospital wing. Curtis did not offer a single shred of resistance, nor did he allow himself the luxury of a dramatic, public spectacle that would further traumatize the family he was leaving behind. He gently placed the baby back into Portia's trembling arms, lingering just long enough to press one final, desperate kiss against her forehead and whisper a solemn vow that he would survive whatever legal hell awaited him on the other side of this room. As he stood up and turned to face Justine and the waiting officers, he deliberately kept his gaze forward, refusing to look back at the heartbreaking tableau of his partner and newborn child. The detectives moved forward with efficient, practiced professionalism, stepping into the dim light of the room to click the cold metal handcuffs around his wrists, the sharp, mechanical sound echoing like a definitive gavel strike through the quiet room. Justine Turner stepped backward into the busy corridor to allow the officers to lead the handcuffed CEO of Aurora Media toward the secure administrative elevator, her mind already shifting toward the second phase of her high-stakes arrangement with Portia. As she watched Curtis disappear behind the sliding metal doors of the elevator, destined for a grim cell at the station house before his eventual transfer to Pentonville, Justine knew that the true test of this secret alliance was just beginning. Portia still held the highly confidential administrative encryption keys and the specific medical registries documenting the sweeping municipal fraud scheme involving high-ranking city officials. The fragile peace of General Hospital had been thoroughly shattered by the events of the night, leaving behind a complex trail of human collateral, legal liability, and an uncertain future that would forever alter the landscape of Port Charles.